Well, good evening everybody, it's Zero, back at you again with another History Buff Reacts video, and this one is titled, Germany Could Not Win World War II. This is a topic that I've seen on a lot of Reddit posts. I think I've seen it go around on Twitter at some point as well, and it also comes up in some history, Discords, channels and Discords as well. I thought, you know, I might as well check this out, see what this is about. I do know, like, World War II is one of my better subjects to know about, so especially anything military, really, I'm usually quite good at. So, let's see what comes up in this video. Let's go. Oh, it's got a little bit of future armor.
I finished fine-tuning my what-if machine.
My what-if
It can
machine.
answer any what-if question accurate to within 1/10 of a plausibility unit. Who wants the machine to show them an alternate reality?
Oh, I want to know.
If Germany wins, if Hitler stops making decisions.
If Hitler stops making decisions. Okay. Nope. That's a big fat
Who
nope.
else has a question for the what-if machine? I have one.
Do they win if they mass-produce the mouse tank?
Mass-produced a Mel's tank, okay. Probably not. Nope.
Make that machine show me what would happen
if they took Moscow.
If they took Moscow, okay.
That's so plausible, I can't believe it.
People love rooting for the underdog. These stories strike a chord with us at a very basic level, and you can tell this by how popular these stories are in media. This also translates to real-world stories, although real life does not have a plot that always turns in the underdog's favor. So there's this kind of romanticism connected to fighting for a lost cause that a lot of people assign to a lot of real-world groups.
Okay.
One of these you see talked about a lot is the German army in World War II, that if only dumb Hitler hadn't been in charge, or if different choices were made, that the war would have turned out different. And a lot of these arguments seem to hold water on the surface, but upon reflection, mostly miss the point or do not make a significant enough change to sway anything. These are my favorite how Germany could have won scenarios, and how they're wrong.
Just take Moscow.
I hear this one all the time, that if the Germans had just driven onto Moscow and taken it, the Russians would have capitulated. But it is rarely backed up with evidence as to why. Even in the memoirs of German generals after the war, they constantly mention that the drive to Moscow would have meant victory in the East. And I think the reason for this is that they model the Russian campaign after the French campaign. In the French campaign in 1940, the French surrender once Paris is cut off from its forces and looks like it's about to fall. Using this model, a lot of people think that the exact same would apply to Russia. The only problem with this is Russia is a whole different animal, both politically and geographically. Stalin was going to put every man, woman, and child in the Soviet Union between him and the advancing Germans, and this is exemplified by the way the Red Army fought the war, often trading casualties for time. So if Moscow was taken, sure, it's a political and also logistical defeat, given that the rail network was centered around it, but no way do I think Stalin is just going to shrug and say, well, we tried, after Moscow was taken.
Oh, hell no.
With that, we would probably see the Soviet Union fighting to the bitter end, just like the Germans did in reality. This is also backed up by real-world history from Napoleon's Russia campaign in 1812, where he went on to take Moscow but still lost the war.
There's a lot of similarities between Napoleon's invasion of Russia and Hitler's. They were both defeated by the same thing. They tried, well, as I said, they tried doing the same thing. Obviously, Napoleon didn't have tanks, but you get what I mean. They went straight to Moscow, or they tried going straight to Moscow. It just wouldn't have happened. As we were saying, you know, the USSR was brilliant at trading casualties for time, and what Germany needed was time. They didn't have time. That was it. Yeah, sorry, they didn't have time. They needed time because they knew the winter was going to come. You know, if they could have done a slower advance, and maybe gone for spring, you know, where, you know, the tanks might have been a little bit better performing and the soldiers weren't freezing by the side of the road. But even then, they started to deal with Russian production, because Russian production was ramping up at this point. They were getting ready to they were basically building an army at this point. They had their munitions and they were building their tanks at this point. It wasn't up to scratch just yet, but it was on the way, and it was climbing fast, like really fast. So Germany didn't have enough time to focus, didn't have enough time to sort of complete what they needed to complete. They just didn't have a chance.
Russia's such a large and vast country that they have the ability to trade casualties and land at a higher rate than any other country can.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
therefore, the normal rules of war, such as taking the capital and ensuring victory, do not apply.
Are they not seeing this? Slightly different what I said, but yeah. Hitler should have listened to his generals.
Another
He did,
commonly
though.
heard point is that Hitler made terrible decisions and he should have just listened to his generals. Now, I'm not here to defend Adolf Hitler. He's a crazy genocidal maniac. Let's not make two ways about it.
Oh, yeah.
But this
Oh,
isn't always the
yes.
case. For example, Hitler and the High Command were all in agreement on invading Russia. They all very much wanted to, in their eyes, destroy communism and save Germany, as Hitler laid out in his book. But once this effort was undertaken, Hitler and his generals began to disagree at times on what moves needed to be made. And once the war is over, many generals in their memoirs begin to claim that Hitler made all the bad decisions, and that if he had just listened to them, the war would have been won. And one example
That's
of
not
this I
strictly
already
true.
hinted at in the former point. Hitler's generals were convinced that taking Moscow would end the war for many erroneous reasons I
Yeah,
listed
case in point.
previously. For Hitler, Moscow was a general direction in which to head, but was not the final objective. For him, the resources in the Ukraine and the oil fields beyond were a much more important target. And given Germany's oil shortages, this is a good example of where Hitler was right and his generals were wrong.
Yeah, 100%. The fuel shortage in Germany started pretty much, I think it was like almost just over a year after the war started. They suddenly realised that their oil production was nowhere near what it needed to be. So they needed a fuel supply. France had no real source of natural oil. Natural oil? I'm thinking natural gas. Idiot. Didn't have any source of oil. Well, any big sources of oil anyway. All the sources of oil were over there in like Russia and in Africa, Northern Africa, and Middle East. That's where most of the oil was, or is. So they needed to advance in that direction. They just didn't have the oil to supply their massive Panzer divisions and the Luftwaffe. They just couldn't supply them properly. I didn't know about the manpower one though. I thought that was later that they started having manpower issues.
And actually, a lot of Hitler's so-called mistakes start to make a whole lot more sense once you put it into the context of Germany's fuel shortages. And if you want more information on this, Tick did an excellent video on Germany's oil problem that you should really check out. Another
think of
example
something
of
else with
this
manpower.
sentiment being wrong is
Might be.
Operation Citadel in 1943. Hitler's generals convinced him that an attack on the Kursk Bulge would cripple the Red Army and renew Germany's initiative in the war.
Kursk was bloody.
Hitler saw this plan as very flawed, though, famously saying, "Every time I think about Operation Citadel, my stomach turns over."
Oh, Citadel.
And seeing
that was
how
it.
poorly this turned out for the Germans, his
Yep.
premonition was eerily correct. Now, if this was the caricature of Hitler always overriding his generals that is commonly seen, Citadel would have been called off before it was launched. Now, these are just two quick examples, and yes, there are times, especially later in the war, where Hitler overrules his generals with poor decisions. The Battle of the Bulge comes to mind.
Wow,
But
the
early in
Ardennes
the war,
offensive,
when
yeah.
these decisions really count, Hitler is many times making the right decisions when overruling his generals, or going along with them in agreement of a common goal. So, Hitler should have just listened to his generals and he would have won the war, is a moot point. Because
no,
many
wouldn't make
times he
sense.
did, and his generals were wrong, and many times he didn't, and he turned out to be right.
It's all Adolf Hitler, Adolf Hitler, Adolf Hitler.
Boy. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I mean, at the same time, later on in the war, Hitler did make a lot of bad decisions. Militarily speaking, I'm saying. Militarily speaking. He did make a lot of bad decisions, but in the early days, he made decisions that his generals didn't like, but in the grand scheme of things, sort of made sense. Maybe his generals may have come up with something after, or near the end of the war, sorry. And maybe they would have come up with something, I don't know. But even by that point, I think they would have just been buying time, apart from anything else. Like, there's no way they would have won it anyway. Absolutely not. Just going back to the thing I said about manpower, I must have been thinking of something else. I thought he said something about manpower, but he didn't. Must have just got a bit confused. Or maybe I'm confused, I don't know. I'm half awake. I'm going to be honest, I'm half awake in a minute. But, yeah, manpower shortages, I don't think they started happening until about 1943. Or that's when it was most pronounced. Maybe they're having manpower issues before that, but, yeah, that might come up, I don't know. We'll see.
This is actually a point I used to subscribe to. A very honest critique of the German war economy is that it was not on the right footing, and people make this argument
So what was this point? Oh, just make more stuff. Okay, got you.
usually saying things like, Germany should have just made more Panzer IVs instead of pouring resources into the Tiger.
With
or
what?
Germany should have built the Luftwaffe back up so they could regain air superiority.
With what?
And I will give you that the German war economy in many places was an absolute nightmare. John Parshall does an excellent lecture on tank production in World War II and really highlights how backwards the
Interesting,
German
okay.
production process was for armored vehicle manufacturing, and mentions how that knowledge can be applied to other types of war manufacturing. And although once Speer takes over, production is streamlined to a degree, and munitions and weapons production goes up year by year, it's not near where it needs to be to fight this attritional war. So obviously
Absolutely
the solution is to just streamline production, sort of how you see in the American model, and this would have given Germany a better chance in the war. Although this is a good criticism, it misses the core issue. The biggest thing Germany was running low on from 1942 onward is, as I mentioned before, oil. And larger numbers of tanks and planes wouldn't be any good if there was no fuel to run them.
Well, no.
Also, Germany was having manpower shortages as early as 1942 or 43, and along with fuel to run
Nah,
these
that's about
machines,
right, yeah.
you need people to crew them.
So he's just seconding that point. Well, I'm seconding his point. Depends which way you want to look at it. You know, manpower and fuel shortages from 1943 at least. That streamlining point is actually a really good point though, because this is something that you see between German and Soviet production. I said something about it earlier, but Russian production was starting to ramp up quick. But the thing is, there weren't that many models of Russian tanks. And they had a lot of batteries focused on just one tank or one armoured vehicle, whereas Germany constantly changed their designs. So, you know, there was a lot of different types of tank, but that puts a strain on manufacturing because you've got to constantly change your production every single time they want to do a new tank. Well, it's all well and good having new designs of tanks, you know, but maybe not put them into production straight away. That might not be a good idea. Whereas on the other side, you've got Russia, who's building, you know, thousands upon thousands of the same tanks, and they're ready for combat. Yeah, you've got these guys who are building the tanks that did no work, and then you've got two to that one who are building a new tank which may have some flaws. You know, why not stick with the one which you know works and just stick with that? Or just improve that one rather than make a whole new tank. Yeah, it just didn't make sense. And then, of course, the manpower problem. You know, it's all well and good having a tank, but you need people to crew it. And then the fuel, you need something to fuel it. But it's the same with the Luftwaffe as well. They had new designs of aircraft probably, I want to say every 6 months, maybe a bit longer. They kept designing new aircraft. Again, the same problem there. How are you supposed to produce that many different types of aircraft that quickly? Logistically, it's just not possible. Well, it is possible, it's just a really bad idea.
These are just two issues that cannot be remedied by streamlining production. At a certain point, Germany is just going to be out of oil and out of men.
Yep.
And no amount of additional tanks
And out
or
of steel.
planes would operationally be possible.
What's the matter? Run out of gas?
Kinda embarrassing.
What was that from, sorry? Just coordinate with Japan.
This is another point that deceptively
Yeah.
seems to make a lot of sense, as Germany was crushed by a two-front war. It stands to reason that if Japan and Germany through their alliance had coordinated an attack on Russia, they would have won. And that may honestly be true. A big boost to the defense of Moscow came after Russian troops from Siberia were sent west after the Russo-Japanese Non-Aggression Pact. The
I mean,
only
that
problem
is
with this
true,
is that
but-
coordination did not and was never going to happen.
No.
Germany and Japan were allies by circumstance and shared no real common goals with each other. And in fact, they're operating in opposition to each other at times. German training of Chinese troops in the 30s as they were fighting the Japanese is a direct example of this.
I
In
forgot about
short,
that, actually.
neither side was going to stick out its neck for the other. In fact, Russia as a common enemy was probably the only instance in which they would have, and even then they did not. The reason for Japan not wanting to do this is mostly colored by the Japanese experience against the Soviets at the Battle of Konkangal, please forgive my pronunciation, where the Red Army gave the Imperial Army a very bloody nose in an undeclared border conflict. This incident convinced the
I don't actually know that one. I might have to double check. Unless I do know and I've just forgotten. I'll have to double check that one. I don't remember what that was. I knew they had some really bloody fights between each other, but I don't remember any specifics. And there was a reason why it was a non-aggression pact and not a capitulation. Because they got so far into Russia, and then Russia just absolutely kicked their asses. And then just nothing happened after that. They signed a non-aggression pact. Japan probably wasn't ready to go to another war with the Soviets. I mean, at this point, the Soviets would have been ready for a war, so probably not a good idea to run into them again. I don't know.
Japanese to not go through with any action that would provoke the Soviet Union, as they did not want war with them, since they were already fighting China and would soon be fighting the United States.
No,
this avoidance of provoking the Soviet Union went far enough that during the war in the Pacific between Japan and the United States, the Japanese refused to sink any U.S. merchant ships headed to the Soviet Union. So, the Japanese attacking the Soviet Union directly flies in the face of the intentions and characteristics of the Japanese High Command, to the point where it strays out of potential history,
Kill yourself.
into the realm of fantasy.
Right.
You have screwed me again.
Japan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. It just wouldn't have been plausible. It just wouldn't have made sense. Because yeah, Japan could have gone ahead with it, but they would have just been wiped out earlier. At the same time, maybe that would have caused the lack of a nuclear bomb, maybe? Who knows? But, again, the chances of it being possible are next to nil. I think Russia would have had to provoke Japan for that to happen. And yeah, Japan was already having fighting in China, or was it Manchuria at that point technically? Because it wasn't a unified China, was it? Am I thinking of something else? Can't remember. Might be thinking of something else. No, I think it was called Manchuria at that point. And then it became China afterwards. I can't remember. We'll have to figure that out. But yeah, they're already at war. They're already having a massive land war with China, which isn't exactly a small country. And then yeah, they were going to bomb Pearl Harbor and go to war with the US. So if Japanese had attacked both Russia and America at the same time, they would have been screwed. So there was absolutely no reason to attack Russia, just for their own survival. What's this one then? More Wunderwaffe. Okay. Look at that. Is that a mouse? Erica. The mouse looking like that. Maybe I'm wrong. Oh no, I don't know what that is. Yeah.
This is my favorite one. If they had just made insert ridiculous design here, the war may have gone differently. And it's the idea that this thing, or this thing, or this thing would somehow have single-handedly lengthened the war. There are a few fan favorites for pics of these. The one I see most often being the mouse, the ridiculous 200-ton behemoth that in reality would have been awesome target practice for Allied fighter bombers and something for Allied soldiers to gawk at once it had run out of fuel and had to be abandoned.
You see the size of that damn thing? It's insane. Yeah, how the hell do you... Like, there's probably engines nowadays that would probably struggle to pull that. They didn't have that powerful engine back in the day. How the hell would they have fueled that damn thing? How the hell did they power it? That thing must have been slow as hell. Probably thinking, yeah, it's well armoured. It's very well armoured. Oh, it can get across anything. 3 miles an hour. It's like, great. 3 miles an hour, great. That's not particularly useful, though. I think it had one of the biggest caliber guns ever produced, but again, it would have been useless. I can imagine this close air support aircraft just absolutely bombing the crap out of that damn thing. It would not have survived long.
Or German jet aircraft, that although cutting edge and superior to what the Allies had, still couldn't have been applied in a large scale due to the aforementioned fuel and personnel problems.
Yeah, exactly.
And the list for these things goes on and on. A personal pet peeve of mine in this category is the what-if question about the German atomic program, and the claim that if they had applied themselves, the Germans could have come up with an atomic weapon first. This notion, though, just like that of Japan invading Russia, very quickly falls into the category of fantasy, once looked at for 3 main reasons. One, many of Germany's top scientists were expelled in the 30s for being Jewish, automatically limiting German atomic capabilities. And actually, many of these scientists went on to work in the American nuclear program.
True.
So to make this win scenario work, you automatically have to make the Nazis tolerant of Jews, which is not going to happen.
No.
2. The German atomic program is all but cancelled by 1942. As Speer put it, we got the view that the development was very much at the beginning. The physicists themselves didn't want to put much into it. Which works into my third point, that Hitler saw atomic science as Jewish science, and pointed the focus of German development towards conventional weapons. So we're not even talking about an atomic race between the US and Germany, as it was barely being pursued by the Germans. And to give a what-if scenario about it would fly directly in the face of what Hitler stood for. And this gets into the bigger problem with this question, that even if Germany does produce these wonder weapons, and extends the war, it's only going to extend it long enough to be the first country to get nuked, due to the Germany First policy of the Allies.
Are you making a
jet plane?
Or a remote control that can turn you into
Super soldier?
Or is it just another dumb
Tank?
Yeah, that's interesting because the atomic weapon, obviously, first produced by the US, it was more kind of born out of necessity as well. You know, they weren't prepared to go to the extreme lengths of going through a land invasion of Japan because it just would have cost so many lives on both sides. You know, I have no doubt in my mind that America would have won against Japan regardless. But, I mean, the reason for that being that the Japanese Imperial Navy was already in pieces by that point. But the island hopping campaign for the US would have just been so bloody. I want to say stuff like, you know, the Battle for Iwo Jima, and is it? Am I thinking something else? Wasn't there a battle called Hacksaw Ridge? I think I've heard about as well. Iwo Jima is the one I remember, but Hacksaw Ridge, I'm sure, is America versus Japan, and that was a bloody conflict as well. Like a really bloody conflict. I think it was probably those two battles that made America think this is probably not a good idea to be running against the Japanese in a land battle because they're pretty set on defending Japan. I'm not saying the Germans weren't, but the Germans, it was like the Germans were prepared to fight to the death. But the Japanese were absolutely going to fight to the death, no matter what. You know, absolutely no retreat, no surrender. Obviously, as you know, there was a lot of German POWs by the end of the war. Because, you know, they knew they weren't going to win. But Japanese, no. They were going to fight to the death one way or another. And there's even stories of them taking their own lives. Just so, you know, they keep one bullet left for themselves. Dark, but that's the way it worked. That's the way it worked. They saw their emperor as a god figure. Whatever we said went. So, yeah. So, interesting video. Definitely. I'm going to see if there's any more, because there seems to be like a minute and a half left. So let's have a look.
Now these are just a handful of points that people bring up when talking about how Germany could have won, but there are many more that I didn't go into that are equally baseless, such as the Germans should have and could have invaded England, even though the Kriegsmarine would not be able to support a large amphibious attack, and the much larger Royal Navy would have probably sunk the invading force before it even reached the shores. Or that Barbarossa should have taken place earlier, even though it wasn't really the winter or the rainy season that stopped the Germans, it was a lack of supplies that needed to be brought up. For more info on that, check out this lecture by David Stayhill.
No, that's true.
You'll see people bringing up scenario after scenario that bends reality and character motivations very widely to craft a scenario that Germany could win. But here's my point. Germany would not have won World War II no matter what way you slice it. The fact of the matter is, this is a country that is too small and too short on resources to take on the three largest world powers at once, especially given the erroneous actions and motivations they have. Basically, the Germans dealt themselves a bad hand and played it poorly. And the only way that's going to change is if you bend time and space to their liking with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. All things that are not going to happen in reality.
There's a part 2. Ooh. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy it, please make sure to press those like and subscribe buttons, and also hit that bell so you know when I upload. Also, check out the Twitch and Discord links in the description below. I do have them. I'll be streaming more. I'll be streaming a lot more soon. And Discord, if you just want to chill out and get notifications for, you know, announcements, events, streams, videos. You get the picture. But if you want to see some more, check out over here. You'll see the most recent video apart from this one right at the top over here. And down below that you'll see the whole History Buff Reacts playlist of all the videos, well, all the HBR videos I've done over the past 9 months. 9 months, man, Jesus. But anyway, I've been Zero. This has been Germany Could Not Win World War II. Make sure you stick around because there might be a second one. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.